The ship came down wrong. That was the most charitable way to describe it. A Velhari sovereign-class diplomatic cruiser, worth more than most colony planets, came screaming through the atmosphere of Dulveth Station at an angle that made every dock worker on the lower promenade stop and stare. 3 of them dropped their tools. 1 dropped his lunch. The cruiser's stabilizers were clearly shot, the left thruster venting plasma in a geyser of blue-white fire, and the emergency landing protocols had engaged so aggressively that the ship practically fell the last 200 meters rather than landing. It hit berth 7 like a declaration of war. The blast wave knocked 3 cargo haulers sideways. A food cart went airborne. The dock master, a heavy-set Grellian named Proth, sprinted for cover and screamed into his comm, and when the dust and sparks finally settled, berth 7 looked like it had lost an argument with a small moon. Kale didn't sprint. Kale didn't drop anything. Kale put down his plasma torch very carefully, because plasma torches were expensive, and walked toward the wreck at the steady, deliberate pace of a man who had seen enough disasters to know that panicking never fixed the ship. He was human, which on Dulveth Station meant he was one of about 40 out of a population of 12,000. Humans had been part of the galactic community for just under 30 years, which in alien timescales meant they were essentially still in diapers. Most species still weren't entirely sure what to make of them, too aggressive, too optimistic, too loud, occasionally brilliant, frequently baffling. Kale had heard all of it. He'd been a station mechanic here for 6 years, which was long enough to have fixed ships belonging to every species in the conclave and developed strong opinions about most of them. Velhari, in his experience, had the most beautiful ships and the worst maintenance culture in the galaxy. They considered manual labor beneath their dignity. They paid for everything to be automated. The automation, inevitably, broke, and they paid someone like Kale to fix the automation, and then they paid someone else to fix the things the automation had broken while it was broken. He reached berth 7 and looked at the cruiser. It was worse up close. The left thruster housing had partially separated. The stabilizer array along the ventral hull had 3 sections completely burned out. The landing struts had taken impact damage that would need full replacement. The docking seal was misaligned, which meant whoever was inside was currently breathing recycled air at whatever quality the ship's interior reserves allowed. Kale pulled out his scanner and started walking the hull, making notes in the unhurried way of someone who was already calculating parts lists. The docking hatch opened with a hiss of pressurized air and a shower of sparks that narrowly missed his head. He didn't look up from his scanner. "How bad is it?" The voice was female-controlled and carried the particular precision of someone accustomed to being listened to. Her galactic standard was perfect, not translated perfect, but actually perfect, the way someone spoke it who had studied it as a primary language rather than a convenience. "Pretty bad," Kale said, still looking at his scanner. "Left thruster housing needs replacement, not repair. Stabilizer array, I need to see the internals, but I'm guessing 3 of the 6 nodes are gone. Landing struts are scrap. Docking seal is going to need realignment before you go anywhere. How long were you running on emergency systems?" A brief pause. "Approximately 4 hours. He winced. "That explains the stabilizers. Emergency systems will push them past rated tolerance if you're not careful. Did you get any alerts?" "Several." "Did you do anything about them?" Another pause, this one slightly longer. "We were attempting to reach the station." Kale finally looked up. She was Velhari, tall, which they all were, somewhere around 2.5 meters, with the characteristic silver-toned skin of the northern bloodlines and hair that was so deep a blue it was nearly black. She was wearing what appeared to be traveling clothes, which on a Velhari meant garments that still looked like they cost more than his monthly salary. Her eyes were the pale gold that Velhari considered unremarkable but which humans still found startling, large, luminous, slightly too symmetrical to be entirely comfortable. She was also injured. He could see a gash along her left arm that had been hastily bandaged, and she was holding herself with the very deliberate stillness of someone managing pain and not allowing it to show. Behind her, two more Velhari males, taller, with the bearing of guards, stood in the hatchway looking like they wanted to be very much somewhere else. Kale looked back at his scanner. "You need to get that arm looked at. The med bay on level 3 will have someone who can treat Velhari physiology. I can call ahead if you need." "That is," she stopped, "that is appreciated, the ship. I'll get you an estimate within the hour. Parts availability on a sovereign class is going to be the issue. The thruster housing, I can probably fabricate the mounting points, but the thruster unit itself, I'll need to check the parts catalog." He made another note on his scanner. "You'll be here at least 3 days, probably 5. Berth 7 is yours in the meantime. Proth won't be happy about the state of it, but that's his problem." She was quiet for a moment. "You are not going to ask who I am," she said. "Should I need to?" "Most people do, on principle." Kale glanced up again briefly. "Doesn't change what's wrong with the ship. Doesn't change what parts I need. Doesn't change how long it takes." He paused. "Unless you've got a priority access code that gets me ahead in the parts queue, in which case, yes, who are you?" There was a sound from behind her. One of the guards made a noise that might, in some languages, have been interpreted as a suppressed laugh. She did not laugh, but something in the set of her shoulders changed, very slightly. "I do not have a priority access code," she said. "Then it doesn't matter." He tucked the scanner into his belt. "Get your arm looked at. I'll have the estimate ready in an hour. You want it sent to the ship's systems, or you want a hard copy?" "Hard copy," she said, after another of those small pauses. "Fine." He turned back to the ship. "Watch out for the panel on the starboard side of the hatch. The release mechanism is stuck, and it'll drop if you lean on it." He heard her descend from the hatch. He heard her footsteps move away. He went back to cataloging damage. It was, he would think later, a perfectly ordinary start to a perfectly ordinary repair job. He had no idea. Part 2. What her guards knew and he didn't. Her name was Saralind Hvithais Koran. More formally, Her Imperial Highness Saralind Hvithais Koran, 3rd Princess of the Velhari Sovereignty, Keeper of the Second Seal, Voice of the Outer Reaches, and roughly 14 other titles that took approximately 45 seconds to recite in full, and which no one ever actually recited in full because that was genuinely impractical. Her guards, Oren and Merv, both veteran members of the Imperial Security Division, were deeply aware of this. They were also deeply aware that the human mechanic, who was currently poking around the undercarriage of the princess's ship, had no idea. "Should we tell him?" Merv murmured as they escorted Her Highness toward the station's medical level. "He didn't ask," Oren replied. "She didn't tell him. She never does." This was, in fact, true. Saralind had a habit, well documented within the imperial household and deeply frustrating to her security detail, of declining to introduce herself by title in situations where she deemed it irrelevant. It had caused 17 diplomatic incidents over the course of her 28 years. It had also, on 3 separate occasions, gotten her information and assistance she would never have received if people had known who she was. She was not stupid. She was, in the opinion of her guards, sometimes too clever for everyone's peace of mind, including her own. He told her to get her arm looked at, Oren added, with the careful neutrality of someone observing something unusual without quite knowing what to make of it. He told her to get her arm looked at before he asked about parts, Merv corrected. They both thought about this as they rode the lift to level 3. In 6 years of guarding Her Highness, they had encountered many people who treated her exactly as her rank demanded, a few who treated her as a target, several who treated her as a political asset, and one memorable individual on Threll Station who had genuinely not recognized her and had attempted to sell her counterfeit navigation crystals. They had not previously encountered someone who looked at a princess with a bleeding arm and a broken ship and said, "Arm first, then ship, and by the way the panel on the starboard side is stuck, watch your step." "He's competent," Saralind said, quietly, as if the conversation had been happening aloud instead of in significant glances. "The ship will tell us," Oren said, which was the diplomatic way of saying they would reserve judgment. "His hands were steady," she said. "He moved around the hull like he knew it, not like someone who was performing competence, like someone who actually had it." Merv said nothing. In 6 years, he had developed a finely tuned instinct for when the princess was simply observing and when she was cataloging. This was cataloging. "He didn't adjust his behavior when he saw me," she continued. "He looked up, completed his assessment, injury, yes. Identity, not relevant, treatment, recommend level 3 medical and return to work." "It could be rudeness," Oren offered. "It wasn't, it was priority assessment." She paused at the entrance to the medical bay. "He assessed correctly." She went inside. Oren and Merv stood in the corridor. "This is going to be a long 5 days," Merv said. "At least 5, Oren agreed. Part 3, the estimate and the argument about the estimate. The estimate, delivered in hard copy as requested, was thorough enough to be almost intimidating. Saralind had sat in the station's transit lounge. She had declined the sweet broth had hastily offered when her guards had, after careful deliberation, quietly informed him who she was, because the sweet would have required her to be somewhere other than accessible, and accessible currently felt important, and read through it with the focus she normally reserved for treaty documents. The human's handwriting was precise, slightly cramped, the notes in the margins in 2 different colors of ink. He had broken the repairs into 4 categories: critical due first, structural due second, cosmetic optional, and what he had labeled, with what she was coming to recognize as characteristic directness, bad habits to fix before they become critical. That last category contained 7 items, each with a brief explanatory note. Item 3, Emergency Thruster Protocol Override. Whoever installed this set it to suppress stabilizer alerts during override mode. This is not standard. This is also probably how you ended up here. I've flagged it for correction during the repair. Item 7, Internal Atmospheric Monitoring System. 3 of 12 sensors are offline. You'd never notice in normal conditions. In an emergency, you might not get warning in time. Replacing all 12 for cost of replacing 3 because the working 9 are old enough that they'll start failing in sequence, and I'd rather do it now. She read this last item twice. Then she took the estimate and walked back to berth 7. He was inside the ship. She could hear the sounds of systematic investigation, panels opening, diagnostic tools running, the occasional muttered observation. She climbed the hatch and followed the sounds to what had been the engineering bay, which on a Sovereign-class cruiser was spacious enough that a human could work without feeling cramped, and found him lying on his back underneath the primary stabilizer, housing with a light clipped to his collar and a scanner in each hand. "The estimate has 7 items in the last category," she said. "Yeah, he didn't come out from under the housing. I can prioritize if you want. The first 3 are the ones that could actually hurt you. The last 4 are just habits. Things that accumulate." Item 3 says someone modified the emergency protocol installation. Someone did. Is that normal? He came out from under the housing then. He sat up, examined one of the scanners, wiped a smudge off it. No. It's the kind of modification that gets made when someone wants a ship to go faster than it's rated for and doesn't want the safety system stopping them. Or, he considered, or when someone doesn't understand what the safety systems are for and thinks suppressing the alerts is the same as fixing the problem. Which do you believe applies here? He looked at her for a moment with the direct, assessing gaze she was beginning to associate with him. Based on the rest of the ship's maintenance history, Second 1. This vessel has been maintained by automation for a long time. Automated systems don't understand context. They flag, they suppress, they log, but they don't know when something is a symptom of something bigger. He paused. How old is this ship? 11 years. And the last time, a living technician did a full inspection. She did not know, she said so. He nodded as if this confirmed something. That's the answer, then. Automated maintenance caught a stabilizer alert, ran its standard suppression protocol, logged it as resolved, and moved on. Did that 7, 8 times over the years. Each time the underlying problem got slightly worse. By the time you actually had the emergency, your safety systems were configured to not bother you about it. He stood, tucking the scanner back onto his belt. It's not sabotage. It's just what happens when you stop having people look at things. She absorbed this. You are thorough, she said. It's a big ship. Thoroughness is faster than fixing the same thing twice. The estimate's total is substantial. Yes, he said it without apology or softening. It's a substantial amount of damage. I'm not disputing the damage. I'm noting that I will need to arrange transfer of funds, which requires communicating with my household. And they will have questions about why I am on Dulveth Station instead of, she stopped. Instead of wherever you were going, he said. Yes. That's outside my department. He picked up a second scanner, checked its charge. If it helps your timeline planning, the thruster housing is the bottleneck. I've put a priority order in the parts queue, but we're looking at 60 to 70 hours for delivery. Everything else I can start on immediately. If your household sends authorization, I can have the cosmetic and structural work at 60% completion before the thruster housing arrives. That is helpful information. Also, he hesitated, which was the first time she had seen him hesitate. The gash on your arm. Velhari tissue regeneration is faster than human, but the dressings they use at the level 3 med bay are calibrated for mixed species. You might want to have them replaced with species-specific ones if you have access to them. The healing will be cleaner. She looked at her arm. The bandaging was neat enough. Do you have medical knowledge? I've worked on a station for 6 years. You pick things up. He went back to the stabilizer housing. There's a Velhari Cultural Center on level 6. They'll have proper supplies. I can send you the bay number if you want. She stood there for a moment. Why are you telling me this? He looked up from the housing, and she could not quite read his expression. It was not the studied blankness of someone performing neutrality, not the careful deference of someone aware of rank, not the aggressive friendliness of someone who wanted something from her. It was just as straightforward. Because it's useful information and you don't have it, he said. Why wouldn't I? She did not have an immediate answer to that. She thanked him, which felt slightly strange for reasons she could not immediately identify, and went back down the hatch. Part 4, 5 days, and what happens in them. The first day, she arranged funds and sent the authorization codes. He acknowledged receipt, sent a revised schedule, and went to work. The second day, she walked the station because remaining in the transit lounge while her guards exchanged significant glances was producing diminishing returns. Dulveth was a trade station, mid-size, the kind of place where half the species in the conclave pass through at some point or another. She had been to stations like this before, but always with purpose, always with schedule, always with the particular layer of formality that being herself required. Without the layer, it was different. She visited the cultural center on level 6 and got proper dressings for her arm from a Velhari shopkeeper, who spent the entire transaction clearly trying to work out if she was who he thought she was while being too polite to ask. She ate at a food vendor's cart on level 4 that served something that was technically an approximation of 3 different species' traditional dishes simultaneously, and was surprisingly good. She watched a cargo dispute get arbitrated in the main, promenade with the passionate efficiency of people who had done this many times before. She went back to berth 7 in the late afternoon. He was outside the ship, running diagnostics on the stabilizer nodes he'd removed. He had a portable workbench set up, components arranged in a pattern she suspected had logic to it, a cup of something hot at his elbow that he periodically sipped without looking at. "How is it going?" she asked. He glanced up. 4 of the 6 nodes are gone, not 3. Revised estimate in the morning, sorry. You found the problem accurately. The finding matters more than the initial count. He looked at her with a slight furrowing of his brow, as if this was an unexpected response. Most people are unhappy about a cost increase. Most people are not traveling in a ship with 4 failed stabilizer nodes and 3 atmospheric sensors offline, she said. I find I have recalibrated my assessment of what constitutes bad news. He almost smiled. She clocked it, the slight shift at the corners of his mouth before it resolved back into professional neutrality. Fair point, he said, and went back to the diagnostics. She sat on a cargo container nearby, undignified but available, and watched him work. She told herself it was useful intelligence gathering. She was generally honest with herself, but she was not quite honest enough to examine that rationalization too closely. You said you've been here 6 years, she said after a while. 6.5. Why Dolveth? He was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone deciding how much of an answer to give. Ship mechanics who work on mixed-species vessels were not common. Humans have been in the conclave for 30 years and most of us are still specializing in our own tech. I learned on an Ashari freighter crew, which meant I learned everything Ashari, Grelian, Veilhari, Keth systems. There's maybe a few dozen of us who work across species like that. Dolveth is a trade hub, mixed traffic, steady work. Good place to be useful. You chose utility, she said. I chose interesting problems. He set down one of the nodes and picked up another. Human mechanics working on Veilhari systems is still unusual enough that I get the challenging ships. Ships with history. Ships where something's been wrong for years and nobody noticed because nobody human ever looked at them. He tapped the node. This failure pattern here, for example, Veilhari automated diagnostics would have flagged this as a simple wear failure. It's not. The burn pattern on the secondary coil is wrong, it failed first, which created load stress on the primary, which then failed. The automated system would replace both and call it done. But the secondary failed because of an installation error that's been in the ship since it was built. The mounting torque is wrong. It's been vibrating slightly for 11 years. The vibration caused metal fatigue. The fatigue caused the coil failure. She looked at the component in his hands. If you replace the nodes without correcting the mounting torque, you'd fail again in 4 or 5 years, probably at a less convenient moment than this one. He set the node down carefully. It's in the revised estimate, the mounting correction. I should have caught it in the initial inspection, but I didn't have the nodes out yet. You are adding it to the estimate, rather than simply correcting it without telling me. It's your ship. You should know what's being done to it. She was quiet for a long moment. On the 3rd day, she brought him lunch. This was not something she had planned. She was passing a vendor on level 4 whose offerings looked approximately adequate, and she thought of the cup at his elbow that he sipped without looking at, and she ordered 2 portions, and she brought one to berth 7. He looked at it, then at her. You didn't have to do that, he said. You didn't have to flag the mounting torque, she said. You could have replaced the nodes, collected payment, and let me discover the recurring failure on someone else's time. He accepted the container. I'd know I'd done it wrong. Exactly, she said, and sat on the cargo container and ate her lunch while he ate his. On the fourth day, the thruster housing arrived, 30 hours early, because a canceled order had freed up a priority slot. He sent her a message with the revised completion estimate, 2.5 days ahead of schedule. She read it 3 times, not because it was complicated, because she was not sure she was glad about it. On the 5th day, the day the ship would be ready, she went to berth 7 in the morning and found him doing the final systems integration, which meant he was at a console inside the engineering bay, running check after check with the focused attention of a man who was not going to sign off on anything until he was satisfied. She watched him for a while from the doorway. "I need to tell you something," she said. He finished the sequence he was running. "Okay. My name is Saralind Vithais Koran. I am the 3rd princess of the Velhari sovereignty." He turned to look at her. His expression was, she wasn't entirely sure. Not shock exactly. Not the particular horror of someone who realizes they've been insufficiently deferential. It was something more like rearrangement. The same methodical reordering she'd seen him do when he found the mounting torque issue. "Okay," he said again. "You're not going to react more than that." "Should I?" He turned back to the console. "It doesn't change what was wrong with the ship. It doesn't change that it's fixed now. It doesn't," he paused, his hand stilling on the console. "Does it change the payment arrangements? Because I filed those under the name of record and the payment is fine. Then I'm not sure what to do with the information, except note it and move on." She crossed the bay and stood beside him at the console, looking at the diagnostic screen. Everything was reading green. The ship, rebuilt from its failures, was breathing steadily. "Most people, when they discover I am who I am, recategorize every interaction we've had," she said. "They reconsider what they said, assess whether they were appropriate enough, adjust their current behavior to compensate." "That sounds exhausting." "It is extremely exhausting." She looked at the screen. "You told me to get my arm looked at before you asked about ship damage. You were injured. You told me about the stabilizer failure history, because it was useful information I didn't have. It was. You told me about the Level 6 Cultural Center, because proper wound dressings would help my healing. They would." She was quiet for a moment. "None of that was because I'm a princess. None of it was because you were trying to impress me, or afraid of offending me, or calculating what you might get from treating me well." "No," he agreed. "It was because those were the correct things to do in the situation." He was still looking at the console. "You had an injured arm, a broken ship, and you didn't know the station. Those were the facts." I responded to the facts. "That is," she found herself without the word she wanted, "that is unusual." He finally turned to look at her. His expression was still that same direct, assessing thing, with something underneath it she was only now learning to read. "Your Highness," he said, "most people don't know you're a princess. They respond to you being a person. Is that really that uncommon?" "More uncommon than you might think," she said quietly. He looked at her for another moment. Then he turned back to the console and started the final sign-off sequence. "Ship's ready," he said. "All systems nominal. The mounting correction should hold indefinitely if you get regular inspections, actual inspections, not automated flags. I've put a full maintenance log in the ship system, flagged for follow-up in 18 months. You put a follow-up reminder in my ship system. Someone should remind you." She laughed. It surprised her, the laugh, startled out of her, genuine, without the practiced quality that laughter sometimes acquired when you'd spent your life performing it for courts and councils. He looked at her sideways, and something in his expression had shifted into something warmer, surprised at itself. "Thank you," she said, "for the ship. That's my job. And for the arm. That was just. And for the Level 6 Cultural Center. Useful information. and for telling me about the mounting torque when you didn't have to." He was quiet. "You are," she said, "the only person in recent memory who has treated me correctly without knowing who I was, and now that you know, you are still treating me the same way." She paused. "I find that I am going to remember this." He looked at her. "You say that like it's significant." "It is extremely." He was quiet again, and she had the sense of him rearranging information again, carefully putting things into their correct slots. "For what it's worth," he said finally, "you were an easy client. You asked intelligent questions. You didn't blame me for the damage. You let me do the work without interference." He paused. "And you brought lunch on the third day." "That was nothing. Most clients don't." He turned fully to face her. "Your Highness." "Safe travels." She inclined her head, the slight, specific inclination that in Veilhari formal culture was used between equals, not the deference angle, not the formal acknowledgement, but the one between people who had met on level ground. "And to you," she said. Part 6. What happened after? She left. Of course she left. Her ship was repaired, her schedule was already stretched past its tolerance, and there were 7 diplomatic functions and a treaty negotiation waiting for her at her destination. She went back to being the 3rd princess of the Veilhari sovereignty, keeper of the 2nd seal, voice of the outer reaches, and the rest of the titles. She was very good at that. She had spent 28 years becoming good at it. But she thought about Dulveth Station. She thought about it during the treaty negotiation, when 3 senior diplomats spent 45 minutes arguing about the precise wording of a clause, while the underlying problem they were trying to solve sat unaddressed, and she found herself thinking about a man who said it doesn't change the ship, so it doesn't matter. She thought about it at the 2nd diplomatic function, when a Keth ambassador spent an entire dinner very carefully calibrating every sentence to what he thought she wanted to hear, and she found herself exhausted by it in a way she hadn't let herself be exhausted before. She thought about it when her staff brought her a routine briefing that included a section on human mechanics working on cross-species vessels, and she read the section twice. There were, as he'd said, only a few dozen of them. She had Oren pull the name quietly. Kale Marin, Station Mechanic, Dulveth Station, specialization in Veilhari, Ushari, and Grelian drive systems. Certified across 11 separate ship classifications. 12 commendations from the station master over 6 years, which was unusual. No complaints. She put the report in her personal files and went back to the treaty negotiation. 3 months later, the Sovereignty's outer fleet conducted its annual maintenance review. The review, as it had for the past 40 years, recommended continuing the existing automated maintenance protocol with minor adjustments. Sarah Lynn read the review. She read it the way she had read Kale's estimate, carefully, looking for what the systematic process might miss. She found 6 items. She wrote a counter-proposal that included, as its 3rd recommendation, the assignment of qualified cross-species mechanics to conduct physical inspections of sovereignty vessels at 18-month intervals. Her senior advisors were puzzled. It was, they noted, an unusual departure from established protocol. The cost-benefit analysis was not immediately obvious. She explained the mounting torque. Not the entire story, just the principle. Automated systems diagnose symptoms. Experienced technicians find causes. The difference over time is the difference between managing failure and preventing it. Her advisors debated for 6 days. The proposal passed. It was, in the larger scope of things, a small change. A procedural shift in how the sovereignty maintained its fleet. It would save money in the medium term and lives in the longer term, both of which were good, and it would become one of those entries in historical records that future analysts would point to as a quietly significant decision that had outsized impact. But she knew that wasn't why she'd done it. Part 7. 6 months later, DULVETH Station, Berth 7. The ship came down correctly this time. A Sovereign-class cruiser, different registry than the last one, but the same unmistakable silhouette, descended on Berth 7 with the smooth, precise control of a vessel in perfect working order. Its thrusters were synchronized. Its stabilizers performed exactly as rated. It settled into the docking locks with a gentle, authoritative click that spoke of recent and thorough maintenance. Cale was working on a Grelian hauler 3 berths over. He watched the Sovereign-class land with the professional attention of someone who appreciated good systems working the way they were supposed to. The docking hatch opened. Saralind descended the steps, not the emergency hatch drop of 6 months ago, but the proper boarding stairs, which had apparently been repaired as part of a comprehensive overhaul. She was dressed in traveling clothes again, the same expensive-looking practicality, and this time she wasn't injured. She was accompanied by Oren and Merv, who Cale did not know by name but recognized by their bearing, and by a fourth person, shorter, different species marking, carrying a case that had the shape of professional equipment. She walked toward him directly. He put down his tool. "Your Highness," he said. It still felt slightly strange in his mouth, not wrong, but like learning a new word for something he'd had a different name for. "Marin," she said. "Back already?" He glanced at the cruiser. "Different ship." A different ship, one of the outer fleet vessels. She stopped a few meters away. "I have a proposal." He waited. "The Sovereignty has instituted a new maintenance review protocol," she said. "Physical inspections, cross-species qualified mechanics, 18-month intervals. We are currently identifying and contracting with technicians who meet the certification requirements." She paused. "You meet the certification requirements." He looked at her. "You want to hire me to inspect Velhari fleet vessels?" "Among other things. The position involves consultation on maintenance protocol, training of automated diagnostic parameters, and flagging of systemic issues for non-automated assessment." She was watching him with that direct, assessing regard that he recognized now. "The salary is significant. The work is interesting. The travel is—" a slight pause. "The travel is extensive." "What's the other ship for?" "That is your assessment vessel, for this trip." A very slight adjustment in her expression. "The ship has not had a physical inspection in 22 months. The automated logs are—" "Let me guess," he said. "Clean." "Entirely clean." He looked at the ship, then he looked at her. "Oren's the one on the left," she said. "Merv's the right. The fourth person is Thessaly, my technical liaison, who has the maintenance logs for the vessel and will answer any questions I can't." He looked at her for another moment. "You put a follow-up reminder in my ship system," she said. "I am, as it turns out, following up." He picked up his tool, set it down properly on the workbench, and wiped his hands. "You should know," he said, "that if I find something wrong, I'm going to tell you it's wrong even if it's inconvenient." "I am counting on that," she said. "Absolutely." He nodded. "Let me see the maintenance logs," he said. Thessaly stepped forward with the case. Oren and Merv, 6 months into a quietly revised opinion of human mechanics, exchanged a glance that might, in some interpretations, have been satisfied. Part 8. What HFY found. The ship had 11 items. None of them were catastrophic. 2 were structural concerns that would become serious within 18 months if unaddressed. 3 were the kind of accumulated automated suppression issues he'd come to think of as the Velhari problem, symptoms flagged, resolved on paper, underlying causes quietly worsening. 6 were the maintenance equivalent of bad habits, not dangerous yet, but pointed toward danger. He wrote them all up. He explained each one to Saralind in the methodical, direct manner she had come to expect, with the specific causes rather than just the symptoms, and with the timeline of what would happen if left unaddressed. She asked intelligent questions. Thessaly asked technical ones. Oren and Merv asked nothing, but they were listening. It took 4 hours. At the end, Saralind looked at the list and was quiet for a moment. 11, she said. 11, he confirmed. The automated inspection found 0. The automated inspection was looking at the wrong things, he said. Or rather, it was looking at the right things in isolation. The problem is that ships are systems. When something fails, it changes the load on everything connected to it. Automated diagnostics are good at finding the failure. They're not good at understanding that the failure changed the environment for everything else. He set down the scanner. That's what you need someone who can walk the hull for. She was quiet. How many ships are in the outer fleet? He asked. 112. He thought about this. About 112 ships with automated inspections that found 0, and what was actually accumulating inside them. You're going to need more than one mechanic, he said. I'm aware, you're the first contracted, the program scales. She looked at him. I told you the position involves training of diagnostic parameters. The long-term goal is to make the automated system smarter, to train them on what human mechanics find, so they know what to look for. He looked at her. You want me to teach the automated systems to think the way people do. I want you to help make them better at it. She said it as a simple statement of fact. The automated systems are not the problem. The problem is that they were never calibrated by someone who understood what they were missing. You understand what they're missing. He was quiet for a long moment. That's a much bigger project than inspecting one ship, he said. Yes, she agreed. It would take, he did the mental calculation, the way he always calculated parts lists. It would take access to the full fleet diagnostic database and data on every failure that's ever been logged and then found to have a deeper cause, and time to analyze it, which means the inspection work can't be full-time. The contract accounts for this. Thessaly has the breakdown. He looked at Thessaly, who had the expression of someone who had prepared a very thorough document and was prepared to answer questions about it. You planned this, he said to Saralinda. I had some months to think, she said. I tend to think thoroughly. So I noticed. The not-quite smile was there again. The proposal is in the contract documents, she said. You should read them before deciding. The work is significant, the salary reflects that, and the travel is, as I mentioned, extensive. She paused. Some of the travel may involve this station. Some of it, he repeated. The sovereignty maintains a diplomatic transit arrangement with Dulveth. Official visits are not infrequent. Another pause, the kind with something else in it. It would be useful, when traveling, to have access to a local mechanical expert who is familiar with Velhari vessel systems. He looked at her. You want a mechanic on retainer when you pass through the station. I want the person who found the mounting torque, she said very precisely, to be findable. He was quiet. In the cooling metal of berth 7, in the particular quiet of a station between freight shifts, he thought about 6 years of interesting problems, and the one that had come down wrong in the middle of a perfectly ordinary afternoon, and turned out to be the most interesting problem he'd encountered. I'll read the contract, he said. That's all I'm asking. She inclined her head, the equals inclination, the one he didn't know he was interpreting correctly but did, for now. He picked up his scanner. The 2 structural concerns, he said. I can start on those today if the parts are in station inventory. Thessaly has the authority to approve immediate repairs. Then let's see what's in stock. He was already moving toward the ship. He paused. You want hard copies of the repair documentation, or digital this time? She looked at him. Hard copies, she said. Always hard copies. Good call, he said, and went to work. Oren looked at Merv. Merv looked at Oren. They said nothing. because they were professionals, and because some things did not need to be said aloud, and because in 6 years of guarding Her Highness, they had become very good at recognizing the particular quality of her attention when she was not merely observing but choosing. They took up their positions and were quiet. The mechanic was already inside the ship. The princess was already following. Epilogue 3 years later, a note in the Imperial Maintenance Archive. Entry Ref. HFY SVC Protocol 7, Year 3 Review **. The Cross-Species Physical Inspection Program has completed its third full cycle. 112 Outer Fleet vessels have received an average of 2.4 physical inspections per vessel over the review period. Total identified maintenance items, 847. Items assessed as critical or near critical by automated systems prior to inspection, 12. Items assessed as critical or near critical following physical inspection, 89. The Diagnostic Recalibration Program, DRP, operating in parallel, has updated automated inspection parameters 217 times based on findings from physical inspections. Automated systems now flag an estimated 60% of physical inspection identified concerns prior to human review, compared to a baseline of 14% at program initiation. Fleet incident rate, down 34% over review period. Program cost, below initial projection. Notes: Program architect recommends expansion to inner fleet vessels in Year 4. The original contracting mechanic has been designated Senior Technical Advisor, a role created specifically for this program, and continues to manage the physical inspection team of 14 cross-species mechanics. It should be noted for the archive record that the program originated from a maintenance assessment conducted under non-standard circumstances on Her Imperial Highness's personal vessel at Dulveth Station, and that the assessment identified 11 items missed by automated inspection. The Senior Technical Advisor's initial observation, that automated systems are good at finding failures, but not at understanding what failures do to the systems around them, remains the organizing principle of the program. Her Imperial Highness reviewed this report personally and has authorized its classification as a standard policy document rather than a personal correspondence file. She has also, separately, authorized the attachment of a personal note to the archived file, which reads as follows. He told me to get my arm looked at before he asked about the ship. I have never forgotten that. I don't intend to. SVC, Third Princess of the Velhari Sovereignty **. End. Word count, ~10, 450 words. Duration at 160 WPM, minutes. Film seat applied, Austin Powers. The Spy Who Shagged Me, 1999. Hidden Identity, comic reversal of expectations, underestimated protagonist, cheeky confidence expressed as quiet competence. Right arrow, she never forgot, used as both emotional anchor and structural through line.